Hello, live. I've got to say happy anniversary because my wife told me to, and if I don't, I'll get in trouble, which is a constant thing.
Thank you.
This is our late version, 7:30.
Unexpurgated. What can we get? We're beyond the watershed edition.
I was watching the USFL this weekend where they've mic'd up the players, which they probably should have done at Hull on Saturday. But it's not a great idea because they swear all the time, these American footballers. But unlike the NRL, where Sky apologises, they forget to apologise and just let them say whatever they want, which is brilliant.
Interesting, it's the BBC and the Challenge Cup that have done that in previous years. They've actually mic'd up the players, haven't they? That would have been good.
Ashton Sims became a star, didn't he?
Yeah.
And
somebody has to edit out all the swear words by half time.
Have you ever asked Louis to do that?
He could do that. Yeah. As he said, the prettiest looking water boy at the moment.
Oh. Is that a poll? Do we open it up to the public? Is Louis McCarthy-Scarsborough the prettiest water boy in Rugby League? Let us know.
Is this our version of Derek and Clive when they were drunk? Oh, you won't know that reference. It's a cultural reference.
I don't get it, I must admit.
No. Peter Cook and Dudley Moore.
I've heard of them, yeah.
Did a parody, Derek and Clive, which was very funny.
Right.
Except they also did a couple of bootleg albums where they were recorded when they were absolutely paralytic, where there was very little content other than just a constant barrage of swearing. But at a certain point in time, they were cult listening.
Almost sounds like that's an end of season podcast, isn't it?
That was one of the words they said a lot on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Possibly misheard.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's still my highlight of the season. Is going to, because you've been to a million season launches, you ask the same questions over and over again. You go to Cameron Smith. What's it like being a cult? That kind of thing.
What was that word?
I'm not sure what he just said there. But.
Oh, it's not as bad as listening to Robbie Hunter-Paul yesterday talking about decades, but in his accent, it sounded like something completely different, which wasn't his fault. Certainly wasn't talking about anyone else on the panel on the BBC, who I thought were great this weekend. Right, shall we? Jamie's asked us about the trial. We'll come up to the trial in a bit because it's all tied into one another, isn't it? A busy weekend for the match review panel, who have sat this morning and released their findings for everyone to slag off on social media, because that is what people do. Great line from Jamie Peacock about the people you can't argue with and win. Teenage daughters don't have one. Referees, you were one. You can't argue with referees, can you? Because they're not going to change. You're not going to change your mind, are you? Once you've decided that some player's done something naughty.
Referees have been known to change their mind, but only as a result of information coming from a touch judge or a video referee.
Not a player.
Never from a player. So that's everybody knows that, but does it still go on? Yeah, it does, as we saw on Saturday.
But how many forward passes did you give on the advice of the sound stand? That's the
they would suggest plenty against the opposition and maybe and never against. I don't know.
Josh Griffin, without being flippant, other contrary behaviour, which you understand from the way it's been worded, is calling into account the impartiality of a match official, which you can't do.
Yeah, he's questioned his integrity, and that's what the minutes say, isn't it? And there is no safer guarantee for a player to be red carded than to question the integrity of a referee.
But what was bizarre being there was firstly it was after the hooter had gone for half time.
Yeah.
And originally he's given a yellow card, so clearly he's gone over there, let his feelings be known, clearly got no change, but there's no play going on.
No.
So to then go back and get that yellow turned into a red, there can only be one person culpable for that.
Yeah.
And that is the player themselves. And the shame is that he again was probably arguably maybe Texoy Hull's best player in that opening 40 minutes, and we have seen particularly this weekend that having 12 players doesn't necessarily mean you're going to lose. In fact, there's one team that did remarkably well.
Well, we've talked about that before. We talked about Leeds Rhinos the other week, didn't we?
It did cost his team the game.
Yeah, I mean, I will go back just because I've said this on record before around particular incidents in games. Hull was still capable of winning that game, as we saw at the weekend.
Yeah.
Wigan played, 74 minutes with 12 men.
Yeah.
Leeds at Wigan a few weeks ago won with 12 men. So it can happen, it does happen. So to blame Josh Griffin, in my opinion, is is wrong. Did it have an influence on the outcome? Without doubt.
Yeah. The only thing with that is that, again, watching the way St Helens... See, the thing about Warrington not winning with 12 men is that they didn't play very well. They didn't exploit
Agreed.
that. What St Helens did was they hit where Hull were weakest, and they actually won the game in the third quarter when they got 2 tries, hitting the areas roughly where Josh Griffin would have been defending. So it's not necessarily that you're playing with or without an extra player, it's how you exploit that, and St Helens were good enough to do that.
Agreed, and look, don't get me wrong, it makes it so much more difficult to defend when you've got 12 as opposed to 13, but it has been done before. I mean, yeah, there's a couple of points I would make on this, is that, you know, people will say, oh, well, they'll go back to the decision, was the decision right or wrong to penalise for the ball steal? Well, I would just say irrelevant. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter whether it was right or wrong. I don't think the video evidence is conclusive in either way, to be honest. So, but it's immaterial. A decision has been given that a player does not like. I've given decisions. You've seen lots of examples where decisions are being given that are actually correct, and the player still doesn't like it, and then will object. Now, the hooter's now gone, so you can't then blow a penalty. So that option's taken away from him. Josh Griffin sought the referee out. He went to him. He initiated the discussion, even if it was a one-sided discussion. And he was given a yellow card, and that would have been the end of it.
That should have been the end.
Yeah.
I mean, again, if you're a slightly hot-headed teenage player just making your way in the game, but you know, Josh has been Hull's best player for the last 2 or 3 weeks. He had a huge impact in that first half, but he's a very experienced player. I don't know why he had to go back a second. You know, if he got the yellow card and he'd spent the first 10 minutes on the sidelines, he's already harming his team. What on earth possesses you when you're an experienced guy?
He just lost the plot. He lost the plot, and you know he won't be the first, and he isn't the first, and he won't be the last. But no doubt behind the scenes, it was interesting at the half time, showing the camera in the dressing room of Gareth Ellis and Jason Davison, I think more or less informing Tony Smith, who's probably missed it, what's happened. And that must have been a bit of a bombshell for Tony Smith. But
Tony was great in the press conference.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that some profanities have been said. I don't know the detail of it, but I trust the referee wouldn't send anyone off without a good reason, so we'll just have to wear it.
Yeah. And you can't say fairer than that.
Hats off.
And, you know, yeah, look, I think you could see again on that camera, because they showed in the second half, didn't they, when Saints had started to score, Griffin in the dressing room with presumably his partner and child. And, you know, he looked upset, and understandably, you know, and I'm sure he will have learned a huge lesson. The club will have learned a lesson from it in terms of the wider team. But, you know, for people to then go on social media and to blame the referee is just utter dross and madness. I mean, even I got a message direct on my
It's your fault,
my
James.
Instagram. Somebody chose to message me on my Instagram to basically almost ask for Chris Kendall's telephone number in order so he could then abuse him. I mean, it's just utterly absurd.
But what does a club have a responsibility to step in and say, look, you're representing us as a fan of this club, we're not standing for it, you have your season ticket revoked for the remainder of this season, or you're not going to be welcome at the... Because we have to do something.
Yeah, arguably, yes. I mean, the difficulty is with some accounts, some people don't want to put the names to them.
No.
But I was always amazed when, like this person did at the weekend, was quite happy to put their name to something to then abuse the recipient of it. And I had death threats through social media directed from people who were prepared to put their names to it, and police investigated it and attended the person that had done it. So, you know, it beggars belief that actually some people will be prepared to put their name to it. You know, but it's just twisted. It's a twisted mentality that you seek to blame the referee for a player that has just abused the referee. Now, clearly people don't know what was said. Now we understand it's questioning the integrity. But actually, should it matter?
No.
You know, you can have an opinion on Chris Kendall. You can have an opinion on any referee, whether you like them or dislike them, whether you agree with the decision or otherwise. But I just fail to see why you somehow support a player who's clearly spoken to the referee in a completely and utterly inappropriate manner. The referee's tried one direction, it's failed. and he's chosen
he's
to
done
continue
it twice. That's the thing that is even more
I mean,
unfathomable.
I'd go the complete opposite way and to say I think Chris Kendall did an absolute service to the game, live on the BBC,
Yep.
where you've got a player giving the referee a spray. We now know it's questioning his integrity. And actually, Chris, instead of choosing to ignore it, that happens in other sports, which people generally
or
do
play
not
it
like.
down, could have left it as a
Yeah.
yellow.
Yeah, he chose to deal with it entirely correctly. And for me, he should be supported on it.
The other thing as well is that if found guilty with it being a grade F offence, it would be a minimum 6-week ban.
Yeah.
That's going to leave Hull again in short-handed at a time in the season now where it's really important for them to try and go on a run to try and make the 6.
Absolutely.
So it's just one of the most crass things I've ever seen.
I mean,
on
and
a
then
rugby
you,
league fit.
and then you get into the realms of, well, how does that compare to somebody who's thrown somebody and landed on the head? And they're just different. You can't compare apples and oranges. They are different. One, is one worse than the other? Well, that's for the match review panel to decide, and that's ultimately then for the RFL disciplinary to determine. But is it right that a player questions the integrity of a match official? Absolutely not.
Well, we've also seen, as we predicted last week, that Josh Maguire got his hefty ban and is on a plane out of the country, which I think is the right way that has been handled. And I know there's some people saying, oh, well, the evidence some of it was redacted. And the fact that the player and Warrington didn't appeal it tells us everything we need to know. He knew that would most likely be the end of his full-time professional career. But I don't think we've ever had a weekend of 4 quarter-finals where 3 of them have had a man sent off.
No.
I can't think of another time where that would have happened.
But I think that's
all for very different offences.
I think it shows a reflection of the intensity of the games to some degree. The pressure that perhaps players feel they're under, the pressure to get a result within the 80 minutes because they're a stepping stone away from Wembley. I think maybe that puts an added pressure on players and makes them do things that they perhaps wouldn't do on another day.
And 2 of the 3 are just bizarre in terms of the player themselves has tried to take the law as they see it into their own hand. The third one, which will also carry a very hefty fine, is purely terrible technique.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, what was Kai O'Donnell? He
in somebody
recognised
who
straight
has
away.
been a great player so far this season.
And it can go wrong. Tackles can go wrong. He's not intentionally spear tackled him. It's a tackle that's gone wrong. It's reckless. Is it deliberate? Well, no, I would say it's not. But that still doesn't mean it's not a red card. It's a completely, utterly reckless tackle. Once he raises cocks that sort of elbow up, there's only the player in possession is only ending up in one direction really, and he recognised himself, the player, didn't he, O'Donnell, that he'd got it wrong, and he really knew the outcome before the referee even got the card out of the pocket.
And Cade Ellis is one I don't understand either. And early stage of the game, 6 minutes in, high intensity, season potentially on the line for him because his contract's up at the end of the year. Lead with your head can only lead to one course of action.
Yeah, again, we saw it in the grand final a few years ago, didn't we, when Wigan played St Helens and all that build up in Ben Flower and very early in a game where players are sort of pumped up and they've come out of the dressing room and all that. But again, it was a nothing situation, and then Ellis goes and seeks Ratchford out, the sort of push, and then it ends up in that. It's just, I mean, if you're a coach, he's an absolute coach killer. Ultimately, it didn't affect the result for Wigan, but people would have then pointed the finger at Cade Ellis had Wigan gone on and lost that game. So, yeah, I mean, he's gonna face a few games in terms of a ban as well, isn't he? 3 matches as a grade D, didn't he? Yeah.
And gave up a goal line dropout. They got a goal line dropout from it, and decided to go and lay their head on Stephen Ratchford. Bizarre. Just back to Josh Griffin for a moment. We obviously just mentioned the other Josh and Josh Maguire. He didn't learn from his initial incident, which meant that he got a second longer ban. This will be the first one for Josh, and as well as the lengthy ban we're expecting, you'd also expect then some kind of education programme in there as well, as Maguire got earlier in the season. But what's going to get him on the line at a game or something?
I don't know whether in those situations they do put players on a course. They may do. I'm not sure. But I don't know what the reaction was post game. I did a game once at Hull FC where the stewards basically and the head steward, the ground safety team, advised me it was unsafe for me to leave the stadium, and I had to have my car driven inside the stadium bowl, to get out. And that's the standard policy at the ground when they host a football game for referees. I physically couldn't leave the ground; it was unsafe, and that's not the first occasion that's happened. I know that happened with Ian Smith at that same ground. Is it acceptable? No, it's not. It's totally unacceptable, irrespective of a referee's performance. I may have performed badly on that day, but actually really shouldn't matter.
Well, this goes back to the football issue at the moment with disaster chanting, which is a terrible name for something that's been going on for 40, 50, 60 years. When was the Munich air disaster? So 58, so going back to at least then. And you can't tell me that in 2023 football clubs don't have the technology to be able to point out the people in their grounds who are chanting about this and that and the other various thing. I'm not saying that every rugby league ground has the technology to do the same, but you'd be able to pick out or have an idea of who is, and especially on social media, abusing people, not just match officials but opposition players, and ban them and set an example and say, look, we're not having it.
And there was an example on social media, I think a couple of weeks ago, with Anthony Taylor, the football referee that had gone to referee, was it the
Roma?
The Europa
League final, that's right. And he was travelling through the airport with I presume his wife and his daughter, and they were verbally abused, and then somebody chose to launch a chair towards them, and rightly so. People were horrified on social media. Was that because it wasn't any English teams involved?
No, it's because
was it just
Mourinho.
And who won't get any punishment?
But
which is why I think Tony Smith should be commended for, without even knowing the facts of exactly what's happened, immediately went into a press conference and couldn't and wouldn't support his player.
And by the way, I would say this thing, in terms of social media, I suppose we shouldn't get carried away with those people. There were a lot of people on social media, by the way, sort of bagging Chris Kendall and the situation, but I still maintain that the majority of people in Rugby League would support the referee's actions and would support the strong handling of dissent.
Yeah.
Nobody in Rugby League, or I would say the majority of people that watch Rugby League, don't want to see it go down the avenue of football. And it's often the minority, isn't it, in any social situation. Those that sort of shout the loudest get heard.
Kevin, he's gone a bit Josh Griffin. He says, "Sound's gone, lads," and they say, "Sorry, it was me." Lol. Cheers, Kevin. There were some shocking tackles at the Lee York game, says Kevin. Not only the man who was sent off, but Zach Hardaker here performing some kind of manoeuvre on AJ Towers. Not quite sure what. He only got a yellow card though, so he's okay. And Les saying, "How did Lee not have 3 sent off?"
I didn't watch that game. Hardaker got a grade C, and then Teamby from York got a grade C, and Tom Nisbet from Lee got a grade C, with O'Donnell getting a D.
I think Nisbet's got a couple of games, hasn't he? The others got fines.
The only thing I saw from that game was the O'Donnell tackle.
Heat, intensity. I mean, this is I think I've asked you this before. I'm going to ask it again anyway, because there is the insinuation, and especially when Origin comes around, referees referee knockout games differently.
Yeah, well, they don't really. I mean, certainly at that stage of the tournament, look, you get to a major event like an Origin game, like a Challenge Cup final, the last thing you want to do is be blowing the pee out the whistle, because nobody wants to see that. And at the end of the day, it's not just another fixture, is it? It's a major showpiece event, so if the referee can allow play to unfold, he will do. But ultimately, if players and teams are intent on misbehaving, then the referee has really got no alternative if players don't respond to the comms. I mean, I think the grand final I did in 2017, I didn't really give many penalties. I probably could count them on one hand. I don't think I gave a penalty for the first 30 minutes of the game, something like that. So,
I mean, at least you turned up there where Castleford didn't. So.
Yeah.
I think we saw that in the World Cup a bit, didn't we? That there was there wasn't an instruction to referees to referee it differently, but there was a slightly more laissez-faire attitude to just let the guys play. They all come from slightly different competitions,
Yeah.
that they're all refereed slightly differently on a week-to-week basis. So you use a bit of, not so much leniency, but allow players to be told in a game what they might be doing wrong, rather than instantly penalised.
Yeah, they were, and that more or less is the sentiment that we discussed as a group of officials for the World Cup, that we were there to try and facilitate the entertainment for the general public at large across the world, and there was going to be a large terrestrial audience tuning in to those games, and it was a 4-week tournament, something like that, with players coming from all over the world with different referees, different interpretations, etc., and coming together for a very short tournament. The way in which you can referee a short tournament like that is not sustainable in a domestic competition. And in fact, I don't know what the penalty count was in the first Origin game, but there were a lot of penalties in that game for an Origin game.
Early on there were, in the first half hour.
And so, the referees have sometimes been criticised in Origin games for not refereeing the game really in a way, and you've got to strike that balance as a referee, particularly with the ruck, that if you choose to ride with some slow rucks, that it just doesn't descend, and the game then becomes just so slow and frustrating to watch, frustrating to play. So you've got to find a balance between talking to players, and if you can get a response, you get a response, and you keep the whistle in your pocket. But if you don't, then you come forward with the whistle. But look, that's just the art of refereeing. It's not a science; it's an art.
Well, Warrington going to spend all the money then now, because they've got to go there. 1 quarter spot, 2 quarter spots. Going to test Wakefield's hand on John.
Well, Matt Lodge is, I think, being released by Sydney Roosters. I wouldn't be surprised if he might be somebody that they were interested.
We'll see what happens.
Comes with a bit of history.
Oh, that's perfect then, isn't it?
Yeah.
When's he going to get his first ban? I mean, they go straight into, we're not going to do worst 13s or whatever, but Josh Maguire straight there into the first 13 of worst Super League signings in the history of the competition. It's terrible.
Played 7 and had 19 matches banned.
Did
It's
anyone
not the
notice him
greatest
play?
investment they've ever made, is it?
No, one try.
Oh well. I mean, I don't want to stick the boot into Kevin because he's a Warrington fan, isn't he? But he says we were shockingly bad. I thought we pinched at the end, which we would have done, but as usual we blew it. Wigan deserved it. They wanted more. I think they'd have still with 11 men. Chris Roberts, Aka, Ted Fit. What does that mean? Well-drilled teams are clinical and ruthless and know how to manage games against 12 men. Unfortunately, my team didn't have any of that. Nearly pinched it, but a criminal forward pass summed us up. There's another thing about Warrington which you might not care about or not. Jamie says they could sign Willie Mason. Or maybe he's in that. He's in the team, isn't he? He's in the team. Warrington still are the parent club of Toby King. Why did they allow him to play against them in the Challenge Cup? I know the idea was he was going to stay at Wigan, but it sounds like he's not going to stay at Wigan. But that seems to be that seems amateurish to me. It seems amateurish.
Dave Craven in the Daily Mirror interviewed him after the game, and that sort of come out this morning, and even Toby King himself was surprised that he wasn't stood down. Took that as a bit of a personal slight to show Warrington what he could do, and in the end it bit them. I think, if we're going to start with that game, although I would say the one game that's gone under the radar is arguably the performance of the round, and that will be Hull KR, which is almost disappeared out of the 4 games because it was a midday kick-off in a city where another game was being played, and I don't think enough's been made of the fact that is a fantastic result for Rovers, and we'll come back to that because I honestly thought that Salford were a really good outside bet for getting to Wembley. The thing about Warrington, I think, again, is it highlights more than not getting through to the semi-final of the Cup, that they're still at a psychological block when it comes to the really big games. I think we said last week, this will be a really good test of not necessarily what they might do in this competition, but what they'll be asked to do further down the line when they've made the playoffs and we're into that knockout scenario again, and they're coming up against a really good, well-drilled team. You can't be as expansive as you would like because you're not going to get the space that perhaps you would get in an ordinary league game. What's your plan B? And it just seems to me that without Josh Drinkwater, they are very, very one-dimensional, and that everything falls on George Williams, but he can't pass it and kick it and arrange the attack on his own. And If they'd have gone down fighting, I could have understood it. And it was clear that Wigan are extremely well drilled at virtually 5 drives and a kick for 74 minutes. Did it really well, and the fact that their kicker was on great form as well meant that they turned the ball over where they wanted to, and then relied on their great defence to pin. But what did Warrington actually throw at them over that 74-minute period where they had how many times did they create an overlap? I couldn't think of one until the very last minute when they then threw a forward pass. We're assuming it's a forward pass, and it was given as a forward pass. I think if you watch it on the television, the angle of Peter Matauti's hands seemed to be that he's pushing the ball forward. I didn't hear too many complaints from Warrington fans that cost them the game and they deserved to win it. How can you not create enough when you've got that extra man and you want to be seen to be a team that could potentially win a title? They are a bizarre side at the moment. They must so frustrate their supporters.
Well, Wigan sort of booked this thing. Well, the phrase about form goes out the window when you have a derby game or a cup game. They kind of almost lived up to that, didn't they? But I think what it just showed was that their experience in big games. I appreciate the Warrington squad has changed. If we go back 12 months, it's changed. That squad has changed an awful lot. So they haven't grown as a squad where they've gone to a major final or maybe lost a major game yet. And I think that's maybe what advantage that Wigan had in their armour. I think you're absolutely right in the way that Warrington played. They clearly missed Drinkwater's influence, but
I didn't see a forward that was looking to dominate the opposition, to work off. Paul Vaughan, everybody quite rightly said, has been one of the form forwards, but you can't play the way he plays for an entire season. And already he's probably played 3/4 of an NRL season, so he's getting to the point where you can't just rely on him. But there was nothing else. There was no other forward that was dominating their opposition.
You're right, and I just wondered to what extent the pressure, because I think Warrington were probably, by most people, the favourites in that game. Now, I wouldn't have been able to pick a winner, if I'm honest.
No.
Particularly with Wigan at home. But suddenly with a black man sent off after 6 minutes, you then people are thinking, well, this is almost a foregone conclusion. And then the longer that Warrington don't really convert that advantage, the pressure builds on them.
But even things like Matt Duffy's double movement, again, for an experienced guy who's played in the NRL, that's sheer panic at a point where you're not playing the game, you're playing the expectation around the game.
And that's what I was sort of referring back to early on when I was saying about this is a Challenge Cup and the differences that it has on a player, both whether that be foul play or dissent or, in Duffy's case, that which was just stupid.
Yeah.
And, you could see the reaction down Powell, like, everybody in the ground knew it was a double movement, like, what are you doing? But so that shows you, right, that he's not got that composure that you need to have in those big games, and that was a big game for Warrington.
This is where I ask the Warrington fans, because obviously I don't know anything of that. I'm here to ask questions to get the answers. So, Josh Drinkwater, as you've pointed out, he's not played. He's a key part of this machine. George Williams can't do everything. And as this point been pointed out by Kevin, feel sorry for Williams, he tries every game.
Yeah, of course he does.
So, you haven't got a 6, you put Peter Matauti there, who's not a 6. Would you move Stephen Ratchford there? Does that mean you're moving too many players around because you've got to put somebody else at fullback? Riley Dean's on loan at Castleford. Obviously, you can't bring him back, but who plays 6? Who stands next to or Neo Williams to let Williams do what he can do best?
Plays 6. You've got to find somebody to play 7.
But when you pre-season or going into a season, when you plan a squad, you have a squad for a reason. Yeah. It's not just a 30-man game or even a 17-man game. It's a 25, 28-man game. And, they should have had a plan going into the season, knowing that, well, if Drinkwater's injured, this will happen, and if Williams is injured, this
and clearly they don't rate Riley Dean enough to keep him in that first-team environment. That they were happy for him to go to Featherstone and then come back and now go to Castleford. Clearly they don't think he measures up. They didn't think Morgan Smith did.
But this is where if you have a reserve system...
Well, it's also where your recruitment is wrong, because you cannot rely on Drinkwater and Williams to play in every game in a season, however good they are.
But also, if you looking at Roby and what's going to happen with Roby next year, he's finishing, St Helens have to find a replacement. Now, if that's going to be Darryl Clark, which is what the rumour is, but Roby was always going to retire, so you have to have a transition plan in the same way that
absolutely.
you
and it's not just Roby
players.
retiring, it's that in a year or two after him, they'll lose people like Makinson and Percival and Lomax.
Yeah.
They're, you know, that is the issue for teams like Manchester United in football, dare I say Leeds, because people laugh when I say that when that golden generation retires, what you've got is a void, because the problem you've had is that you can't keep hold of youngsters who are talented because they're never going to get an opportunity. No. So you miss the crop, you let go some of the people that then play very well at other clubs, and you have to rebuild, and rebuilding can take anything between 5 and 7 years.
Yeah, but I see that's where for me.
But I don't think Warrington. I think they've gone out and signed some good players, but there's some holes in that squad that was going to come and bite them at some point. I think, you know, official man of the match, Harry Smith, because again he was extremely influential in the way he took his team. But for me, Ethan Havard was different class.
Oh, it's awesome, wasn't it?
And you can see why the NRL were interested in him as one of the next crop of youngsters. It's brilliant that we're going to immediately the day after re-sign him, and that might again be to do with the marquee extension, which we were told was to stop young players going to the NRL. I hope that, you know, if that's how it's being used, brilliant that Havard's going to be in from. But there's you know, just to counter your argument of the pressure of players in a cup tie and not being used to winning those big games. Those Warrington players are far more experienced than Ethan Havard is, but he looked absolutely made for that game.
But sometimes it's amazing that youth, in the same way that you see when you ever go skiing, you see kids of age like 3 and 4.
I brought my ankle walking down the
look
road.
like skiers?
Yeah, well, I've only ever been skiing once, but you see young children flying down the slopes without an element of fear, and that's what I'm trying to say. That actually, sometimes when you are inexperienced, you don't have that same level of pressure and expectation.
And he knew he was going to be playing long minutes because they'd lost a forward, so he might have played the odd 10 minutes here or 20 minutes there, but he was going to play virtually as long as he was standing, he'd be out there, and maybe he thrived on that. But again, it's almost as if, where was the Warrington player who took the lead of Ethan Havard and said, I've got to match that kid, because if he's just a young lad and he's doing this, I'm a bit more experienced than him, I need to up my game, and they couldn't, which for Darryl Powell must be extremely worrying, because he's taken them from being, I need to change the entire squad, so we haven't got the right mentality, to I now think I've got the right players, we're playing a lot better, we're in a better position than we were this time last year, to now still being questioned about have they got the mentality.
True, but again, I would say, you know, we mentioned this last week, Warrington are second in the table. Yes, they've lost in the quarter-final. They're in a far, far better position than they were last year, and this is not going to get fixed in 12 months.
No.
You know, if they go on and win a grand final, that will be an unbelievable achievement.
Yeah, and people
based on what they did last year.
Forget this game.
So look, you don't come in as a new coach and expect to change it within 12 months, even 2 years, I would say. So
the only saving grace was Josh Dewlis, who was fantastic.
As Chris has said as well. Maybe they could sign Grant Millington to play half-back. That's it from the Darryl Powell playbook. He can fill a quarter spot. Might be cheap, but he might play before Luke Gale does.
I'd stick Ryan Sheridan out. I still
Maybe Darryl. What do you need?
But they did seem a little bit threadbare in that Peter Matautia has some great strengths. He's clearly someone who knows what Darryl wants, because he specifically recruited him from Castleford. He's versatile. I think even he would admit he's not a playmaker. And when you've got that extra man to exploit, it just seemed like square pegs again in round holes.
So Captain Hindsight here sits here and says, what a waste of money Josh Maguire was. You could have spent it on a halfback or something, or some cover at
Well, what I would say is, being at Hull, they are going to get great value out of Jake Truman, because clearly he's coming back from an extremely long and difficult recuperation process for a really bad ACL injury. But every week he's doing a little bit more, dominating a little bit more, taking the team around the field a little bit more. And they didn't have Jake Clifford this week, and Truman still was a very, very important player for them. That's the kind of player that maybe Warrington should have been looking at.
Amazing flashback during the commentary, as I was watching on the telly, when Ben Curry was getting close to the line and Dave Wood says he's dropped the ball. I thought Craig Murdoch was back in my ear from that final at Wembley when Danny Houghton made that tackle 52. Will it be Warrington's year? We don't know.
Not in the cup.
As James says, they're second in Super League. talking about Hull then, on the pitch, St Helens, they're back now. We've been saying for weeks St Helens are back, and they're in the semi-finals of the Challenge Cup, beating Hull 30-8. You were there then, for BBC Radio Merseyside. Did you have to put on a Hull accent?
No, nor even a Liverpudlian accent, unfortunately. The thing about Saints is I think that's the first time in more than anybody could remember where they've named an unchanged team. And it looked as though it was a machine that was well oiled, going through the gears. They didn't play as well as they would like to have played and as well as they'd played in the previous 2 games. But certain players in certain positions just made sure that they won that game. Johnny Lomax made a defensive mistake to let Tex Hoy get away. After that, almost impeccable in the way he took his team around. James Batchelor is proving to be one of the best and most consistent second rowers in the game. That, you know, him and Curtis Siranin together is as good as second row pairing in terms of your work rate and your skill set. They knew that they had, again, some defensive issues when they lost both of their centres and had to put second rowers there, but because they all know their job, what they lacked in speed that you know Mark Percival would have had and Tommy Makinson would have had, they made up for with game sense, knowing the position to be in. So there was a vulnerability wherever Conrad Hurrell defends. There's a little bit of a vulnerability. So when he's then moved out to the wing and there's a second rower playing inside him, that's why Hull, even with 12 men, got some change out of attack. But Saints never buckled. And I just think, again, they're in a place at the moment whereby they're picking from strength. They might lose a couple of players to injury, but you really wouldn't bet against them at the moment. They could not break Hull down. And again, Tony Smith absolutely right, Hull fans absolutely right. Match Saints in a lot of areas, but matching them wasn't enough to beat them over the full 80 minutes. And you just cannot fail to be impressed with. You know, Jack Wellesby probably didn't have his most dominant game. Missed a high ball that led to a try that gave him a few jitters towards the end. But then he immediately went and scored a try, which is what great players do. You know, when that move was unfolding, Wellesby knew exactly what play he was coming into the line and what he wanted from the service for that ball to crash on and score. And he didn't try and get overly involved and overplay. He just went, I've sized it up, Hull a week there, it'll probably be about the 4th tackle when the defence has been pulled from the right to the left. I need to hit that hole at pace, and he will have told somebody that he was coming onto it. That's what class players do. They do make mistakes, but it's how they then rectify them, and that's why Saints were so impressive.
Agree. I thought it was just a professional, pretty workmanlike professional performance. Really, it wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but we said last week it doesn't have to be in a cup, does it? It's about the result, not necessarily the performance. But I don't know. There were some comments, weren't there, by Lamb, Adrian Lamb, about the cup draw being known before the game. So I don't know if that was insinuating that because they'd drawn St Helens, that it was almost like, well, what's the point? Yeah. I don't know.
I don't know.
Did it give York an advantage that they could be playing St Helens?
But why didn't you even do it at half time of a game that's in the balance? I don't you want the biggest audience to see it, and there's a narrative then running through it. The bit I didn't understand was doing the 1895 draw before the York League game had finished, because that was done on local radio, so it wasn't even in the glare of BBC publicity. But then when the draw was made, people are going, but if York win and they're ahead at half time, they won't be in the 1895 Cup semi-final because they've got to play in the Challenge Cup semi-final. And then if they win that, then they'd be in the Challenge Cup final. They wouldn't even be able to play in the 1890s. Like, why do the draw then?
Yeah.
I thought they closed down local radios. It's still going. Oh, you're on it, so you must be.
I must say, I listened to the York League game on the local radio, so it must have still going. And exactly as you've just said, nobody will remember the score. It's how you get to the next round. So full credit to Lee for overcoming having a player sent off early on, going down to 11 men in the first half. Their second half, against an admittedly weakened York side, was incredibly professional. And for all that Josh Chandler kept dropping the ball in the first half, when he needed to score in the second half, he did. The experience of people like Tom Briscoe and Zach Hardacre, Lachlan Lamb apparently didn't have a great first half, ran the show in the second half. That's all you need to do.
But again,
so full credit to York for being ahead at half time, for scaring a Super League team. But it's a Super League team that won.
So yeah, again, I sound like a broken record, but this top 6 inches, that has to have had an effect on League.
Yeah.
I mean, people last week were talking about it was just by how many, and they'd scored 100 points against York last year and all the rest of it. And I never thought it was going to be that sort of score, to be honest. But that has to have an effect on the players going into that game. And I just think they thought it would be a reasonably comfortable
especially when they
win.
looked at the York team, I think had 7 out that would normally be starters. I think that the other thing that it raises the question of is, will a part-time team ever really be able to sustain an 80-minute performance against a full-time team? Because you are going to be worn down purely by the fitness that the team playing at the higher division and the intensity they have to play at, and the fact that they train every day of the week, that even if tactically they are poor, physically they're going to win that battle.
And is that not a counter to the suggestion that the Challenge Cup could go to a Champions League format where you would have, I don't know how the structure would work, but you would have a championship club, I'm assuming, in each of those groups, who then have to play probably, 2 games? Or maybe 3 games against Super League opposition. So you're potentially looking at 2 or 3 one-sided games.
And I think we've been talking about this for years on this podcast, on various different outlets that it's gone about. It's not about constantly changing the format. In fact, it's not even about changing the format. It's about recognising that full-time and part-time is oil and water. And there isn't any reason why you couldn't have 2 competitions that were equally as valuable that ended up at Wembley, but the teams don't meet each other. Batley are 80 minutes away from making Wembley for the first time in their history, which would be astonishing. If they hadn't played in the Challenge Cup this year, but you offered them a route to Wembley in the 1895 or what used to be the Northern Rail, whatever you want to call it, why isn't that as important, significant, valuable? Because we're not going to get the romance anymore. And that was exemplified with York and Leigh.
I agree, but that's why they changed the structure again. Going back to the structure, they changed the structure a few years ago, didn't they, to reduce the occasions where championship clubs would effectively play Super League, because they came in around later Super League teams. So I actually would say that they've already made that change, and they don't really need to make another structural change to the competition. Leave it as it is.
Judging by crowds, I know it's not on season tickets, so we've got 2 games where they weren't given an attendance for various reasons, but 8,000 at Hull, 9,000 at Wigan. You expect those crowds will be bigger when they meet again. Well, we'll find out on Thursday, won't we, whether the crowd will be bigger between Hull and Saints. Obviously, it's different for travelling Saints fans on a Thursday rather than a Saturday.
7,500 season ticket holders. So
I actually didn't think, considering how big, and we said this last week again, how big the stadia are, I didn't think it looked that bad.
It sounded good. That's the main thing. I've said before, and I think I've said on here, the amount of times you put the tennis on, and it's the French Open or Wimbledon in the first few weeks, the amount of empty seats you see on the show courts, more at the French or US than Wimbledon. And that gets all this media coverage, and everyone's going on about all these great British tennis players you've never heard of and never will again after this next fortnight. But no one says, should take Wimbledon off TV, apart from me.
There were 2 good cup games. I mean, there were talking points in the whole game, and I just thought the Wigan game was a cracking game. In terms
couldn't
of
take your eyes off.
No, it was that's exactly what you want for a cup match. And so the BBC were fortunate with the 2 games that they got.
I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of Hull Cower and Salford, which I know was on Viaplay, and if you subscribe...
You could have watched it downstairs, your wife was watching it.
But the problem is, if you go to Hull, you can't watch Hull KR, that's the thing.
You've not got Viaplay in the cake on whatever it's called.
They had the test match on. And it was Rovers anyway, so they wouldn't have put it on even if they had.
So from what I understand, Hull KR put in a tremendous performance.
What a result.
Not just... I know, so the result, absolutely, because
result.
I think people were saying Salford were probably the favourites because Hull KR were depleted. So to get the result, but again, the performance I think was from the scoreline. I mean, I haven't seen the game, but from what I understand, they were fairly dominant, really.
There's something that Willie Peters has triggered there, which is probably working on the back of what Tony Smith started to do, because some of those players were Tony Smith's players, about belief. and it doesn't really matter who's playing in the shirt. This is how we're going to play. This is what playing for Hull KR means. I think George King epitomises that. And again, I've seen on social media the break that he made where he went something like 60 metres up the middle and just got caught but set up a try. The fact that, again, we talk of recruitment, they lose Lachlan Coote, they lose Jack Walker, they sign Tanguy Zenon on loan, who was the match winner for them in this game. They're losing Ryan Hall for a minor operation. They've signed Fuad Yaha, who's coming back.
Not bad, is he?
To me, that I'm not saying that Hull KR's recruitment is better than Warrington's. What I'm saying is they have got their recruitment right. That they're
not only that, but they must have space in the cap to bring players in, mustn't they? So and there's careful management of that.
They've got investors as well who are giving them a rosier future in terms of how they're going to develop the club. But also, I suspect a little bit more money to make sure the salary cap is spent to its limit.
And their key half-back that was grabbing all the headlines in the start of the season is out injured for another extended period of time.
But yet Rowan Milnes then comes in and dominates the game.
So compare that to Warrington.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to stick the boot into Warrington. I'll come back to them in a minute. Stephen's asked us what we made of the sendings off. If you rewind, Stephen, you'll see what we said in full, but generally, they're all right decisions.
The one decision we didn't cover in that game was the Brad Fash tackle, which...
Yes.
Those same Hull FC fans that were having a go at Chris Kendall for being utterly biased for sending off Josh Griffin entirely justifiably, didn't see them object to Chris Kendall not sending off.
Which proved to be, proved to be exactly the right decision in terms of the disciplinary.
Yeah, and I was watching the game and I thought that they handled it correctly. And then at half time, Jamie Peacock and John Wilkin it was, wasn't it? I think. Yeah, it was. They were saying at half time that they should have been sent off. And I was like, what? Really? I didn't get it because for me, Fash is just in a tackle, his arm doesn't move, he falls, and for me it was just accidental. And ultimately that's how Match Review Panel have clearly judged it. So, I think he got it right on the game, and that was proven.
I think that the thought on the media benches, which again is not a barometer of any knowledge whatsoever, was that they probably thought we should have had a sin bin in. Because you only see it at normal speed, it was our side of the pitch, and it looked as though contact had been made with the head, even if it was unintentionally. And I think the thought around, certainly the people that were on the radio that were discussing it at half time, was he was lucky to get away with not getting a yellow card. As it turned out, exactly the right decision.
But you could see on social media everything from between he was correct or it was just a penalty to send him off and hang him. There was everything in between. So, you have to be guarded, I guess, when you look at that.
Cyclops itself has a more unbiased view on rugby league than people on social media. Have we spoken enough about Hull KR Salford now?
I would have liked to have seen more of. No, I've seen the highlights. I've seen the. I was just when I heard the teams.
Yeah.
When we looked at the way Salford have played, when you think that. You're close to Wembley, which is somewhere Salford have been and wanted to go back to because the year that they played there, unfortunately for everybody, there wasn't allowed to be a crowd. I thought the way they were playing on a beautiful sunny afternoon, with all their key players out there, that they would be a side that would be in the semi-finals and possibly back on their way to Wembley. So for Hull KR to win and win so comprehensively, it's just a huge credit to them.
You can't see this at home, but I've got this lovely picture on my desk that I've been waiting to use for ages, which is from that final. It's Richard Agar and Luke Gale. Remember Luke Gale?
Remember each day?
Yeah. I think that's after you'd asked him something and Luke Gale invaded the press conference. But he's 35 this week, Luke Gale. So congratulations to Hull FC's Luke Gale. If you've read the paper, you'll know why. If you're not, I don't know anything. So Kevin has asked a rhetorical question because I know he knows the answer, because he's put 2 question marks at the end of it, and I think he knows we know the answer. The money Warrington have wasted in recruitment the last 8 years, they just seem to panic buy or panic in renewing a player's contract and overpay, in the panel's opinion, who's responsible for this? Do you want to buy David Fafita again? The buck stops to whoever signs the cheques.
Part of it is understandable that they've now gone 2, possibly 2.5, 3 generations since they've won what is now deemed to be the major prize. They are understandably obsessed, but to do that, you've got to do it relatively quickly. So you're always buying, rather than developing. But you look at every club who has won the grand final, there is a core of talent that they have developed. And if I have a problem with Warrington, it's not their recruitment, it's more that they don't give enough space to develop players and allow those players to come into the team. They've now got, Matty Ashton, who I know they signed as a young player from Rochdale, but Hewless.
Didn't come through their system though, did he? It was a signing.
But young enough to be developed then into the Warrington way of doing it. Toby King and George were signed from Huddersfield's academy. They don't develop players, and I think if you don't develop players and you're prepared to wait the 5, 6, 7 years it takes to get a kid in your scholarship and through your academy and into your, if we ever do have a reserve grade, into your first team and into your culture and build a team around a core of kids that want to win together and come through together, you're always going to be wide of the mark.
Part of developing a player is not just playing in an academy, is it? It's actually playing in the first team and being given that opportunity to make a mistake. And that's the whole purpose of having a system which is a playoff system.
And allowing them to make mistakes.
Yeah, but they don't have to win every game.
No,
that's
but the thing about kids is they are not, if you feel you're under pressure to win every game, to get to a grand final and win it, you're not going to risk putting a young kid in who might cost you a game, miss a tackle or misread a 2-on-1 or whatever it might be. But unless you do that and they learn through those mistakes and you're prepared to take the time to get 4 or 5 of them through together, you're not going to win anything.
No.
And Wigan, Saints and Leeds have proved that.
Then look at Castellana. Was it like last year they ended up in a forced, I think, in a situation whereby, I think I refereed the game actually, they played Wigan the last round of Super League and they were forced to field a really young side.
Yeah, they're about 14.
Yeah, but I think, not just that one
some
game.
of them now.
St Helens did that the other year when they played Castleford, I think. By doing that, you reap the benefits.
Well, Tanguy Zenon was one of the players who was player of the match this week, playing for Hull KR, who played in that Catalan team, who's learning his trade and at some point may well take over from Sam Tompkins when he retires. But Warrington don't seem to want to do that.
Jamie says, imagine if Wire would have kept hold of Harris and Sculthorpe. So if Yestin Harris had never gone to Leeds and then never gone to Rugby Union, would Bradford Bulls still be the original Bradford Bulls and not the new Bradford?
Unintended consequence.
Yeah. Chris says, could an unpredictable, creative team like Lee or Hull Kingston Rovers lift the cup, or will the mindset of knowing Wembley be decisive? I mean, I hope Lee wins, because obviously you've got me 5 on them, haven't I? But
semi-finals are very strange beasts. I wouldn't be surprised if one of them throws up what might be termed a surprise result. I think Hull KR will, depending on who they'll need as many of their frontline players up. And the good thing for them is it's 5 weeks away, so they might have a few back. Excuse me. They're going back to Headingley, where in 2015 they beat a very, Warrington team that were deemed to be very hot favourites. So I think Hull KR will not be phased by playing Wigan. They've already beaten them.
They beat them, and then they just narrowly lost, didn't they?
Yeah. So that to me is, I don't. If Saints bring their A game, Lee have now got 4 players banned after this week. They will hit some injuries at some point. There will be some players who they'll need to rest who've played a hell of a lot of games already. They are an ageing side, and it'd be very interesting to see what depth they've got to cover that. Until we get to that week when that game's being played, I wouldn't like to say, but I do think Hull KR have a chance against Wigan.
And Lee, by the way, I've already beaten St Helens this year. So, it can happen, but I think St Helens probably weren't playing as well as they were.
No.
It's fair to say at that stage than they are now. So, but a lot can happen between, as you rightly say, between now and the semi-finals.
Wire says, Chris, I like Man United in the 80s. Trying to buy the league but only winning FA Cups. The class of 92 changed everything. So we've got to wait for the class of whenever to come through Warrington. Stephen has asked, what does Sir Phil... Are we on Boris's list or the King's? This is the question.
Oh, this is from last week.
Because obviously there's one list was good and the other was, what does he think about the ground improvements at Wakefield Trinity? Does he think there might be 14 teams in Super League next year? Stephen is clutching onto the same straws I am. These straws here.
No, I don't think there'll be 14 teams, and I do think that what Wakefield are doing is absolutely commendable. Will stand them in good stead wherever they are next year. I don't think this season's necessarily over for them yet anyway, but the fact that the whole vista of the ground has changed. When you arrive on Doncaster Road, it looks and feels like you're building a proper facility there for the modern day, so hats off to them.
As we've mentioned, Sir Phil, congratulations to all the people who got honours. Is it not going to be like last year when you put, and well done, Nigel. You can say, because that was the most withering piece of criticism in the magazine there ever possibly could have been.
Understatement.
John Dutton has got an OBE.
Is that cycling's John Dutton?
Cycling's John Dutton.
Isn't it the case that whenever somebody leaves the sport, they get an honour?
Yeah.
Be that Nigel Wood, be that Stuart Cummins.
I'm surprised it wasn't
John Dutton.
Sir Ralph Rimmer.
Did
Sally Bolton get one after the Glasgow Cup?
OBE, yeah.
Brian Barwick, did he already have one?
I think he had one.
I think he had it in his black book.
John Dutton was tweeting about cycling speedway. Speedway without motors, just cycling. Is that what they're doing? We need to talk about Oxford as well, Star. Anyway, but 4 members of England's wheelchair rugby league team have been recognised. It says here in the Rugby League Express. Captain Tom Halliwell of 4020 magazine has been given an OBE for services to writing columns. So that's good. Seb Bashara, James Simpson and Tom Coyd have got the MBE. Now it's sad, and this is not just in terms of the England wheelchair team, but also the Women's Euros Lionesses last year, when they gave out gongs, like a right for the sun or something, for the cricketers in 2005, because we haven't won the Ashes for years, and Paul Collingwood got an MBE just for turning up for the final test. Why don't they all get one these days? It's nonsense. Every Olympian gets one for winning gold in the underwater scuba diving canoeing.
I'm told that the model moved to the coach, the captain who gets elevated above the others, the best player in the tournament deemed by the DCMS, not England Wheelchair Rugby League.
Man Nads had a word, did you?
Yeah. And obviously in James Simpson, that's more for services to the game, because although clearly he was in the World Cup squad, he's retired after 10 years playing for the country. So that's why those people have got the honours that they have. I was fortunate to meet James at Hull. He was there on Saturday to congratulate him. He still was talking about, it's a team effort.
So you've not been doing the trooping of the colour?
This one is for you. It's for what you brought to the game.
Yeah, it must be quite difficult though, in a way, to receive an individual honour when you play a team
especially
sport.
when he's a military guy as well, and all of his life has been based around reliance on those around him. But incredibly proud. He said he's going to wear his military medals to go and pick up his MBE.
It's like when the radio awards come around every year. And I care about it less than I used to do. And you're proud when people you like win awards, but then you think, well, these other people have won awards and they're gits, and I don't really like them. So it's a bit, you've got a bit of a bitter taste in your mouth, but at least these people, they deserve them. So
Yeah,
that's good.
and more of them did deserve it.
Do they have any podcast awards in Mexico?
Sadly, no. I mean, there are podcast awards, but you usually have to pay to enter them. Which is why we don't. Which is why we don't enter them. I mean, again, I'm going back onto my computer. You can't see this. I started doing this last week, so I was going to put a thing. See, you can see your head there. And I can't find it now. But it was going to be like all those graphics you see these days with Man City won the Champions League, and here's all the players. It was going to be us three with the Mexican flag behind us. I got
Is there a can we get a scarf or a shirt or something?
the Mexican. That's the
Mexican-
mascot.
Mexico
Tijuana Titans.
Yeah.
In the Women's Challenge Cup, which is
Well,
also ongoing, well done to Huddersfield, who scored some points, and the only team who lost has scored points. Where's Bella Sykes? Can someone tell me where she is? Because she's in the England Knights squad, which again, they shouldn't be called the Knights, could they? As we asked Clint Goodchild at the start of the season, why they're not York Knights anymore? Because it's, they aren't female Knights. So she's in the squad, unattached. She was at Huddersfield, we spoke to her at the start of the season. Where's she gone? What's going on? Why does no one in Women's Rugby League say anything about anything? But Huddersfield lost anyway to Wigan, 46-10. Leeds beat Lee 54-0. I saw she was there with I don't know if she's wearing a hat or not, but she was there.
A bucket hat.
York beat Cardiff 54-0, which I'm very sorry that I wasn't there yesterday to see. And it's interesting to see how Cardiff go on against these teams, because they might be playing against them next year. And St Helens beat Warrington 36-0. Get well soon, Leah Burke, as we mentioned last week. She's got an ACL injury, which appears to be a thing in women's sport, and I don't know why. I'm sure someone will be doing research into it, but it seems to be a thing that's happening.
So the semi-finals.
Yes.
York against St Helens.
See, I know this is a simple thing. It's a simple thing. I don't know why they don't do this on the telly as well, but it says Challenge Cup. Just put the word men's at the front of it, because then underneath you've got Women's Challenge Cup. It's the same thing. Leeds, St Helens, Hull KR Wigan, and in the women's it's Wigan, Leeds, Saints and York, which is obviously...
That's a biggie. But we know when and where they're being played
Yes.
as well.
So Leeds, the women's Leeds team, have home advantage in a semi-final.
They do, but Wigan will be playing in front of a load of supporters that have turned up to watch the men's. I mean,
Yeah.
Wigan would have had to have agreed to that, I would
Yeah.
imagine. But actually, it works in their favour because if
They've got a big.
there's going to be 4,000 or 5,000
Yeah.
people there that'll get there early to support both of the
Yeah.
teams, then that will partly negate it's at Headingley.
No, I agree. From that point of view, it works, doesn't it? Because you've effectively got
Yeah.
a Wigan curtain raiser semi-final.
And you've got a Saints women and a Saints men as
Absolutely.
well. So
Yeah.
in terms of again your television audience,
Yeah.
the more people you can get in there, the better.
Yeah.
London, Halifax and York battling in the 1895 Cup as well. So everyone's happy with the double headers. They've got the details out there fairly quickly this morning about them. So weekend of Rugby League on the BBC. Can't complain about that. Some people are concerned about the scorelines in the women's quarterfinals, but I think they're all as expected. I think the bookie's got at least one of them spot on, so it is what it is.
Seemed credible to me.
Yeah. Something else about this. Oh, the Oddsall thing. So you went to the Oddsall Super Stadium, home of Speedway, or whatever it is, stock car racing, to see all of the penalties. So obviously we should scrap this trial after 80 minutes because it was a complete failure, Phil.
No, I think the key word is it was a trial. I think
we only believe in trials if they go our way nowadays. Do you not know this?
I think one thing I thought coming back was that firstly the trial is absolutely valid, and we are in a sport that has always looked at change. And most of the time that change has been around trying to make it a faster, more entertaining spectacle so that people will pay their money, and in a professional environment that keeps clubs going. This is for safety reasons, so it's a different imperative, but we've never been afraid to look at things or change things. If we went down to 13 men 10 years after we broke away from Northern Union, well, from Rugby Union came Northern Union, so we've had red and yellow cards and 4 and 6 tackles and all that kind of thing. So this is the next road you go down to test whether we have to change the legislation around tackling and kick-offs so that some data can be gathered to then say it works, it doesn't work, we'll move it into the community game or into the full-time professional game. You have to start somewhere. So it's a trial. That's how that's the context behind it.
Well, Jamie's brought us the numbers. So in that first game, there were
57 penalties, of which 49 were for tackles deemed to be above the armpit.
Hull FC St Helens 45.
Yeah.
Newcastle Wakefield 40. So there you go. There's a trend immediately. It's going down.
All three higher than my 37 that I gave him.
So you're outside the top.
I was a
three.
trailblazer.
So the thing about it is, I do believe these trials should have been played behind closed doors. I think the difficult thing watching it at Oddsall with a crowd of about 250, 300 people is clearly the imperative for doing it and the reason for being there is slightly tainted by what you're watching. So it needs to be, you go in there to watch an entertaining spectacle and you're seeing 57 penalties in 80 minutes. It's a bit stop-start. The other thing though, the other side of that is 82 points were scored. So it didn't mean that because there were 57 penalties there wasn't any rugby. And as it happened, the team that offloaded the ball more won the game. And that happened to be the team that didn't have quite as many penalties awarded. So,
I suppose if you go with the stat penalty try.
Well, in that game it was penalty try. I think there were only about 4 sets that didn't have a penalty in, and where the penalties tended to come in blocks. But then step back and look at it again. The players have been taught for a month that the rules were going to change. You're doing that in a very controlled training environment. Put them in the heat of battle and instinct takes over. You then look at what the referees have got to do. Not only have they got to police everything that they would in a game, and it tends to be younger referees in the academy, but the young referee who I thought didn't let any of extraneous stuff phase him in any way whatsoever, was wearing a camera. So again, I think that was so that it could all be filmed and analysed later. I think there wasn't anybody saying he was getting the decisions wrong. The fans were saying there were just too many of them.
And the referee would have hated that.
Yeah, and
the players would have hated
the
it.
coaches again are saying, I've I've told you to sort of slow the ball down, but now all the techniques I've told you, there's some of them you can't use anymore. The other thing that struck me as well was that if as a coach, when you get used to how this is being played, you tell your players to duck into a tackle if they're carrying the ball, the target area means that the tackler is almost invariably going to be hitting above the armpit. That's particularly if you're defending on your own line. So if you're a nippy little hooker or a scrum half and you're bending down and you're trying to get the ball over, you're going to get hit in an area that is deemed to be illegal. So there might have to be some adjustments when we've looked at it. We didn't really see whether the 40-metre kick-off made a difference or not. Part of the reason for that, didn't really have 40-metre lines at Hudsall. Because the pitch is too
Well,
short.
I'm going to say they didn't have them at home, did they, until they had to
Oh,
repaint the
man.
pitch. Yeah, oh dear.
So, but the thing is, we have to do it. We have to measure it, and we have to analyse it, and it will change. There's 24 games, I think, in the whole trial, and analyse the data at the end, not make a judgment on the beginning. But I spoke to a couple of the young players afterwards, and let's face it, we're bringing this in for them, because we want them to have long and enjoyable, safe careers, and we don't want them to have any medical issues when they've retired. And whilst they were, again, there were a couple of players I spoke to who played in pivotal positions, and they were saying for them it was a bit too stop-start, but they understand and appreciate why it's being done, and for that reason it's worth doing. I just think we shouldn't have done it in public, particularly the first game.
Quite possibly.
Because there were media there, they were reporting on it, and Hudsall is full of dust.
Jamie's mentioned there should have been played pre-season. Academy players are playing for contracts and development. Was there a reason why it's been introduced mid-season?
I don't think the research was at a level where they could have brought it in any earlier.
I mean,
It is. I mean, again,
I would assume that coaches know how good players are.
And when you listen to Professor Ben Jones and some of the medical advice that's brought into it, they've now got a brain. I can't remember the exact name, but a committee that looks at the
brain
impact.
committee.
Well, it doesn't sound right, does it? Who's on the brain?
Yeah,
committee?
I want to know who's on the brain committee.
Well, I can tell you it's in the paper.
Yeah. And
To pass an
clearly,
IQ test, you have to get it.
It's in the magazine. It's not in the paper.
An IQ score of.
Yeah, I wrote it. I just can't remember what I wrote.
I'll tell you who's in there. Hang on.
It's the HIA equivalent.
The Brain Health Group,
Thank you.
Yeah.
I knew it had a
which
brain.
includes such as Dennis Betts and John Wilkin, both who have names that are spelt differently than how you'd think. Insurers Bartlett's and doctors Jimmy Phillips and Chris Brooks. There you go.
And it's led by Professor Ben Jones from Leeds Beckett. So I think that, as he said, you want to rush these things in and do the trials, but you've got to get a point in the research where he said they had numerous things they could have done and they narrowed it down to two. Yeah. And the Academy agreed to trial it for them, so you couldn't do it pre-season, I don't think. And it won't be instantaneous. The last game won't finish and they'll go, right, this is what we're doing. No. They'll take it away, they'll analyse it. They'll talk to the referees. I think they're absolutely vital. I think Marcus Griffiths, I think, is mentoring some of the referees that are going to be doing these games. He was there on that Thursday night just to make sure that the match referee didn't have to do any media, and talked about why they were doing it and what they were hoping to get out of it. And clearly, in terms of the litigation that is around at the moment, we have to be seen to be doing it.
And there might be another trial that comes off the back of this, because it'll be informed from the data that's come out of this. So yeah, I think you can't draw conclusions off the first game or the first couple of games.
But say everybody talked about the 57 penalties. There were 82 points as well. So
it's not changing rules for the sake of changing rules, just to annoy people. The championship this week, because that was on, which I may have missed out because it was in the Challenge Cup week. Barrow beat Widnes 26-18.
Widnes are suffering at the moment. In a bit of a slump.
They are. They're falling down the ladder, aren't they?
Bradford and Halifax do 22-all. Everyone loves a draw. There's no golden point.
And I think Bradford scored 8 points in about the last 5 minutes as well.
And they signed Lee Gaskell.
And they've re-signed Lee Gaskell.
Yeah, released from the team who were at the bottom of Super League and didn't want him. So great signing for Bradford. Featherstone beat London 50 points to 6. Newcastle won a match. Well done, Newcastle. You've now won 2 games.
Draws Keighley into it.
Yeah, 18-16. I mean, this is where York, their game in hand when they have to play midweek is going to be interesting, isn't it? Because they're level on points now with Keighley and only 2 above Swinton, who were beaten by Batley 48-6.
Keighley have got an enormous game this weekend against
Yeah,
Wyoming.
I'm going to that game. Guests of the club because it's their
You're not
pride.
playing, are you?
No, I'm not playing, and I'm certainly not refereeing. So I'll be safe to get into my car, I think, on the way home, hopefully. But it's their annual Pride game, so I've been invited to go along. So
Written about.
Yes.
Yeah, so Stephen and I, and we're taking Harris, we'll enjoy the afternoon. But as you rightly say,
On the field.
suddenly it's a
enormous.
massive game. I was trying to explain this to Stephen and press upon him the importance of the game. I think it washed over him. They were just more concerned.
Did you show him the league table?
They would have New Zealand Sauvignon in the bar, and
Yeah.
Well, it's far more. I mean, as we know on this, it's all about hospitality.
Good man.
Yeah.
Good man.
but no,
Are they
massive game.
Canapes, he
Yeah,
said?
yeah.
Do they have them in Keighley? I don't know. Toulouse beat Sheffield 48-10. Well done,
Good result for Toulouse.
and well done Sheffield for jumping on the Full Monty bandwagon and re-releasing their kit that was shown in the film. That might sell some shirts. It's like that's clever marketing. You've written about Pride in the magazine then, and we have a ramshackle feeling about everything we do. So Armed Forces Week seems to go on for about 3 months in the Rugby League. No one knows when to have a heritage round or a charity shirt or this and that and the other. And certainly, I mean, I remember the immediate reaction to Izzy Folau signing for Catalans is Wigan came out and said, right, when we play Catalans, we're going to have a Pride match. This is what we're going to do. And obviously it didn't happen because of COVID. Can as a sport, knowing everything we know about people involved in it, can we have a Pride round? Can that work?
Well, I think it can. It happens in football. It happens in rugby union. They have them in cricket. They have sort of matches. I think the way the RFL seems to have gone with this year is that they've sort of allowed clubs to choose their games when they're going to have these sort of events.
Inclusion round.
Yeah, inclusion rounds, but they're inclusion games as opposed to a round. And for me, I think it has a much more. It's much more impactful when the whole competition draws together to deliver a message, whatever that message may be, whether that's armed forces or whether that's, Pride for for the month of June or Rainbow Laces campaign or whatever it may be. For me, my view is I think the collective is usually stronger. And you're right in terms of Israel Folau. It was disappointing that Wigan then didn't have an event, even though that original fixture didn't take place. So, my disappointment with the Rainbow Laces campaign was that they introduced it and then it just all died a death and was not heard of since.
13 seconds.
Yeah, well, they have 13 seconds now, don't they? But they obviously don't take a knee. It sort of became this sort of 13-second period where I don't know, people don't really know what to do.
We barely get that now.
I'm trying to word this thing carefully because I got in trouble before on this programme. Not from people, but from the RFL. Because I thought we bottled the taking the knee thing. And Wakefield as a club completely screwed it up, didn't they? In that game at Headingley. And then we had to have mandatory diversity training. That was fun for me on teams. There are obviously people who aren't going to want to support it for whatever reason. So how...
Lawrence fault.
Well, at least you can sell him some flags to burn. At least he makes some money off it. How do we do something where we know there will be, not a backlash to it, that's the wrong phrase, but there will be opposition in varying levels to what we want to
I think that's so difficult, isn't it? And it was a minefield trying to navigate that through that time when some players would take a knee, some players wouldn't, and people were then being pilloried because they didn't or they did, and I don't know is the answer. That is the difficulty in it. And I think in terms of sort of a Rainbow Laces type round, and it doesn't have to be that, but when they did it before, players were given the laces, and it was up to the players that if they want to wear them, they can. If they don't, they don't, and that's absolutely fine. I get that. It doesn't have to be just about wearing a pair of laces. It's about making an event of it, and that might be something that you do off the field. It doesn't necessarily need to involve the players, is what I'm trying to say. So it doesn't have to be a one-in, all-in mentality. And obviously that's where the NRL encountered difficulties with Manly, didn't they? And the players didn't want to play, and we've seen that in other sports, in football more recently, I think in France, haven't we? You know, by the way, I don't get that. I don't get this issue about religion supposedly stopping you. I think, interestingly, today, the mayor in Keighley, interesting because it's their Pride game, he's basically suggesting he's now going to have to resign because of his comments, because he appeared with a Pride flag and then apologised for appearing with a Pride flag. Basically, he said
someone put this flag in my hand.
Offended his religion by doing so, and in doing so, he's now had to resign. So, look, it's a minefield, and it's this whole woke business that people talk about is a nonsense in terms of that phrase being bandied about. Look, it's about being respectful to one another. That's it. And I think, look, you have to respect people's individual circumstances and views and beliefs. And look, if somebody doesn't want to participate in it, they shouldn't be forced to do something. So it doesn't have to be that everybody has to wear a pair of rainbow laces or everybody has to take a knee. Having said that, clubs like, I think it was St Helens and Huddersfield, I think were two of the teams that did unanimously take a knee. And I think that was largely because of players within that squad addressed their squad about their feelings on the subject. So where there was player buy-in, you got the whole team buying in. And why wouldn't you? Because it's a team sport.
Absolutely.
So in the same way that, you know, now I'm working at CBRE for this month, I spoke to my colleagues in my office about my personal experience of coming out and the abuse that I'd received as a gay man. And that was an impactful story for people in that office. And they, you know, a number of individuals came up to me and spoke to me afterwards and said, you know, how interesting it was and how much they'd sort of learnt from it. And I'd learnt things preparing the article that I did this month and preparing that presentation. And just because I'm gay doesn't mean I know all the facts and figures around pride, you know. So it's about just learning and helping each other and supporting each other in whatever it may be. So I don't know. I think sometimes people sort of jump on bandwagons.
But
don't
I mean,
they?
to Keithley's credit, if they can do it, any club can do it.
Yeah, honestly, when I went last year for the first time, it was enlightening. You had people from every possible age range, just joining in and enjoying it. It was just a family atmosphere.
Enjoying it for what it was as well.
It was just a bit of fun. There was a drag queen in the hospitality room where we were. It was hilarious. It was just a bit of light-hearted fun, and sometimes people get a little bit too serious about these things. And if that opens up a new audience, then so be it. You know, I mean, you look at the areas like Batley, for example, about and perhaps Oldham, maybe another club and others, where actually tapping into that local population is really what the future of the club should be.
And isn't that what inclusive in its widest sense should mean as well?
Absolutely.
That you're not excluding anybody. You don't have to include everyone, but you're not excluding anyone.
I don't know what to say after all that. I feel like I should come up with some glib comment about drag queens or something. You know, I've mentioned it, but Manuel, I have mentioned that there's no chance of getting a rugby league player on Celebrity MasterChef until they drag up. The drag queens are everywhere these days. For years they weren't on telly, now they're everywhere again.
Yeah, and look, for me, like, actually, RuPaul's Drag Race, which is huge, I hate it. I don't watch it.
No, you have to like that.
Exactly. You don't have to. No, you know, Stephen loves it. I hate it. You know, we're different. People are different. So just because you're gay doesn't mean you have to like RuPaul's Drag Race.
People are different.
Or Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Probably a cultural reference again outside of it. Who were brilliant.
In League
Put
One.
them on YouTube.
In
Two
League
tribes.
Dewsbury beat Mike Reed's going to ban it or something. Oh, that's Relax, wasn't it?
Even more reason to find it on YouTube.
Not that Mike Reed. Dewsbury Rams beat Rochdale 42-0. Hunslet beat Cornwall 36-6. It's the jarring nature of this programme. Let's jump from topic to topic. North Wales 62, Midlands 24, Oldham 22, Doncaster 28.
Sounds like a great game.
Yeah, that was the big game in the League One, wasn't it?
And Workington 34, London 6. That was all the results this weekend in football, in rugby, whatever it is. Women's Nine's on Saturday. That's at the Salford City
no
Stadium.
longer AJ Bell, but Salford City Stadium.
Big game in League One, though, there, Dewsbury Oldham again this week, isn't it? That's a big game. So wasn't that a draw a few weeks ago?
Yes. And that was the game where they let everybody in for free, and it was a sellout at the Vesta.
I think Dewsbury played on Friday night as well. I don't know. That's 2 consecutive weeks where they played on a Friday night. I'm not sure why.
Maybe that's a good night for them. I don't know. now the football
What else
season's
goes on in
over.
Dewsbury on a Friday night?
Yeah, probably. Well, not a lot goes on a Sunday afternoon. Never mind a Friday night.
Hull St Helens on Thursday. Friday then it's Cass Warrington, Hull KR Wakefield, and Leeds Huddersfield on TV. That's a great pick for Sky.
I think that's the game of the weekend,
Yeah.
not because it may necessarily be the best game in terms of the rugby.
I'm sure it won't
but,
be.
My word, there'll be some nerves
Drama,
there.
Yeah.
drama.
Somebody's season ends. The loser of that game.
Seasons and employment.
I hope not.
Well, anyway, I hope not as well. I'm just I've
But
read-
yeah, the clamour for
yeah.
the head of the losing coach will be enormous after that game.
Sheffield.
Although the last game they played was 18-17, so this could be a draw after goal. In fact, they have had a draw after Golden Point. It's 1-0.
Oh yeah. Sheffield Newcastle on Friday, along with Dewsbury Oldham. Saturday, it's everything in France. Catalans Lee and Toulouse Bradford. So there you go. You can watch the women's nines in Salford because there's nothing else on. And on Sunday, Salford Wigan, and in the Championship, Batley London, Halifax Barrow, Keighley Whitehaven, Widnes Swinton, York Fev, and in League One, North Wales Hunslet. Don't know where that will be played, do we? I guess not. Maybe that's Nant Conwy again. I don't know. And Workington Midlands. So lots of rugby league going on this week for us to talk about next week. I think I'm going to go to Bellevue on Sunday to see Wakefield versus Hull KR in the Women's Championship. I've not been to see them this year. And I feel like I should. I feel like I'm
You
letting them
should.
down by not going to see them.
You
So,
can't wear the shirt and not go and support.
No, I know. So, oh, well done Wales winning the Celtic Cup as well.
In wheelchair.
Yeah, we spoke about the. I've taped the Welsh version of the one show to write about in the magazine, but I realise there's no subtitle. I haven't taken the subtitle. It's just all in Welsh. So I'm hoping. I've not watched it. I'm hoping.
Is it
someone comes
Google
on and speaks
Translate?
English. Yeah, I'm hoping someone speaks English at some point. But you ever watch the football on BBC Alba, which I know you don't do, but they'll have the commentary on, and the commentary will be purely in Gaelic, but then the summariser speaks in English halfway through. It's weird.
Sounds a bit like BBC Radio Merseyside.
Hey.
To be honest.
Oh, on that bombshell. Is there anything else we haven't mentioned? No. Oh, we're done. We'll be back next week. We'll get some flags up and stuff. And are you going to come in track next week, Phil?
I'll try. Might have to have a shave.
Oh, it's been a
Unless-
while.
No, you don't need to. You
Kenny
don't need
Everett.
to have a shave.
Kenny Everett.
It's all in the best.
I was
possible
going to say
taste.
Yeah.
Cupid stunt,
No.
but I didn't.
Well, we start as we finish. I once won a fancy dress prize working in Mustang Sally's in Wakefield, dressed as a nurse. So that was good.
Oh, we've all done that.
But